She said it quietly, but it landed like something sharp pressed just under the skin. Try not to embarrass me. They're way out of your league. I told her I'd try, but something in me had already shifted. Evan Whitmore stood at the mirror longer than usual that evening. He adjusted his cufflinks twice, then a third time, even though they were already straight. The reflection staring back at him didn't look unsure, but it felt like it. Not because of the room he was about to walk into, but because of who he was walking in with. Sloane Harrington had always moved through rooms like she belonged to them. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, the kind that didn't ask for permission. Evan had met her at a gallery opening in Charleston, South Carolina. She had been standing near a sculpture no one else seemed to understand. He had made a comment about it, half thoughtful, half uncertain. She had laughed, not at him, but like she found something unexpectedly genuine. That was the beginning. What followed felt effortless at first. Dinners, conversations that stretched past midnight. A quiet kind of closeness that didn't need constant reassurance. But somewhere between her world and his, a difference began to take shape. Not loud, not obvious, but persistent. Sloane came from a lineage of people who had never needed to explain themselves. Her father's name carried weight in rooms Evan had only ever read about. Her friends spoke in references that assumed shared history, shared access, shared privilege. Evan built his life differently. Measured steps, calculated risks, a steady climb instead of an inherited view. He didn't resent her world. He just never thought he'd have to prove himself inside it. Tonight was the first time he would meet them all together. A private dinner in Greenwich, Connecticut. A house that looked less like a home and more like something curated. Sloane had mentioned it casually at first, then more carefully, then with that sentence. Try not to embarrass me. He hadn't reacted, not outwardly, but the words stayed with him longer than they should have. The car ride, there was quiet. Not tense, just absent. Like both of them were thinking things they didn't want to say out loud. When they arrived, the house greeted them with quiet authority. Tall windows, soft lighting, the kind of place where everything looked intentional. Inside, conversations were already flowing. Names were exchanged with familiarity. Smiles were polished, but not insincere. Evan noticed the details. The pauses, the subtle evaluations, the way people looked at him, not dismissively, but curiously. Sloane introduced him with ease. This is Evan Whitmore. No explanation attached. No context offered. At first, the interactions were smooth. Polite questions, light conversation, surface-level engagement. But then the conversation shifted. Investments, private boards, international expansions. Evan listened more than he spoke. Not out of intimidation, but out of observation. One of the guests, Carter Ellington, turned to him with a measured smile. "And what exactly do you do, Evan?" It wasn't a challenge, but it wasn't casual either. Evan answered simply, "I run a logistics firm out of Atlanta." There was a brief pause. Not awkward, just evaluating. Carter nodded. "Impressive. Scaling or maintaining?" "Scaling," Evan replied. But carefully, that word seemed to shift something. Carefully, the conversation continued. But now Evan wasn't just included. He was being listened to. Not because he tried to impress them, but because he didn't. He spoke when it mattered. He admitted what he didn't know. He didn't perform confidence. He demonstrated clarity. Sloane watched from a distance at first, then closer, then with something she hadn't expected to feel. Uncertainty, because the version of Evan in that room didn't need validation. And that made him harder to categorize. Midway through dinner, the tone shifted again. Subtly, a conversation about risk turned into a disagreement. Different approaches, different philosophies. Carter leaned into his perspective. Confident, controlled. Evan didn't interrupt. He waited. Then he responded. Not louder, not sharper, just clearer. He laid out his reasoning in a way that didn't dismiss Carter, but didn't defer either. For a moment, the table went quiet. Not uncomfortable, just attentive. "Before we go further, what would you have done in Evan's place? Would you have stayed quiet to avoid friction, or stepped in knowing it could shift how everyone sees you?" Carter studied him for a second longer than expected. Then he nodded. Not agreement. Respect. "That's a fair point," he said. And just like that, the dynamic changed. Evan wasn't being evaluated anymore. He was part of the room. Sloane felt it immediately, not as pride, but as a realization she hadn't prepared for. Her assumption had been wrong, and that's what unsettled her. Because her warning hadn't come from concern. It had come from doubt. The rest of the evening unfolded differently. More natural, more balanced. Evan wasn't trying to belong anymore. He simply did. On the drive back, the silence returned. But this time it carried weight. Sloane broke it first. You handled yourself well. Evan kept his eyes on the road. I wasn't trying to handle anything. Another pause. I shouldn't have said that earlier, she added. He didn't respond immediately. Which part? He asked. Her voice softened. All of it. Evan nodded slightly. I know why you said it, he said. She turned to him. Do you? You were protecting something, he replied. I just don't think it was me. That landed differently than her original sentence. Because it wasn't sharp. It was precise. And it was true. The following days felt different. Not distant, but aware. Sloane started noticing things she had overlooked before. How Evan made decisions. How he carried himself when no one was watching. How he didn't adjust his identity depending on the room. It challenged her, because her world had always rewarded alignment. Evan operated on independence. A week later, she brought it up again. I think I underestimated you, she said. Evan shook his head slightly. I think you misunderstood me. There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. Before we continue, do you think Sloane's mistake was arrogance, or something quieter like fear of losing control over how she's perceived? Because that question mattered more than either of them realized. Sloane sat with that thought longer than expected. I'm used to knowing how things will be received, she admitted. And you didn't fit that. Evan nodded. I wasn't trying to. That was the difference. Not resistance. Not rebellion. Just authenticity without adjustment. Their relationship didn't end, but it didn't return to what it was either. It evolved. More honest. Less assumed. Sloane stopped filtering him through her expectations. Evan stopped ignoring the subtle ways those expectations had affected him. They didn't become perfect. They became aware. And sometimes that's more difficult, because awareness removes comfort, but it creates truth. And truth doesn't need approval to exist.